With us, Liverpool Football Club has lodged a formal complaint with the UK's oldest and most trusted broadcaster, the BBC. A former newspaper editor was invited to talk about the issue of responsible reporting. Now, that man, interviewed by the BBC, was Kelvin Mackenzie. This was in the wake of the resignation of the two highest bosses at the Beeb over the alleged misrepresentation of US President Donald Trump's January the 6th speech before the Capitol riot. Mackenzie was editor of The Sun tabloid newspaper at the time of the Hillsborough Stadium disaster. These are the actual images of what happened on April the 15th, 1989. I'm sad to say, as we're looking at this, we're seeing people there behind those fences being crushed to death. 96 Liverpool Football Club fans were killed, crushed inside the stadium, as we see here. These images went round the world. Shock, revulsion, horror. One can only imagine what the families involved were feeling. English football had never seen such horror. And for instance, the 14-year-old cousin of Steven Gerrard, who was still a child himself, going on to become a Liverpool legend when he played for the club, his 14-year-old cousin was among the dead. Well, I interviewed many people who lost loved ones on this terrible day that changed English football forever. A public inquiry in 2016 found that the 96 fans had been unlawfully killed, and a cover-up tried to blame them for basically what happened to themselves, rather than looking at the mismanagement of the game by the police and by the stadium officials alike. Mr. Mackenzie's newspaper at the time of the disaster, 1989, led with this front page: The Truth. Now, I knew at the time, because I reported firsthand on the story, that this was a catalogue of lies, but the damage in this front page was done. And you can read there some of the horrible things that the fans were accused of doing. And you can only imagine that the pain that this caused to the families involved in such tragic circumstances remains today an open scar in Liverpool. Sales of the Sun newspaper have never recovered. So in 2016, after the public inquiry acknowledged that there'd been a cover-up and the fans basically been unlawfully killed, he said he'd been hoodwinked. James Pearce has this.
It's a choice that's left some viewers baffled and angry and led to an immediate reaction from the Liverpool Football Club. Kelvin Mackenzie, the former editor of British tabloid The Sun, was invited on the news channel to discuss journalistic standards, following the resignation of the BBC's Director General. A poor choice, say some, considering the former editor's past.
You couldn't make it up, bringing on Kelvin Mackenzie to talk about integrity in journalism. This is the individual who published truly horrific and now completely discredited lies and smears about Hillsborough victims and survivors in The Sun after the tragedy.
Kelvin Mackenzie was responsible for this headline. The Sun blamed Liverpool fans for the disaster that claimed the lives of 97 people at an FA Cup semi-final in 1989. Many of the victims were crushed to death, and the paper published the false claims 4 days after the incident. A mistake that the editor later owned up to. Since then, the club and many people in the region have boycotted the tabloids, with reporters being banned from entering the grounds at Anfield. Liverpool have complained to the BBC over the corporation's decision to invite Mackenzie. Director General Tim Davie stepped down on Sunday after a speech of US President Donald Trump was found to have been edited in the channel's Panorama programme, making him appear to have encouraged people to attack the Capitol in January 2021.
We fight like hell.
The president has threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion should an apology and compensation not be issued by this Friday.
So whether the BBC or not doctored or change the sense of what Donald Trump was saying is a matter of discourse, and you can debate that for as long as you wish. But whether Kelvin Mackenzie was the right person to get to talk about representation and get to talk about responsible reporting, of course, is another matter. And if you ask that question anywhere in Liverpool, red or blue side of the city, they'll say you're having a laugh, and not a very good one. Let's bring in James Pearce. He's the journalist for The Athletic who covers Liverpool Football Club. Grand job to have James, and great to have you here on this one. Kelvin Mackenzie, give us your sense of whether he's the right person to be talking about responsible reporting.
I don't think you could possibly have picked anyone worse or unsuitable to give his opinion on honesty, integrity, and doing the right thing when it comes to journalism. And that's why everyone I've spoken to at Liverpool Football Club, and I broke the story yesterday that they contacted the BBC to register their complaint are so disgusted at the choice of him as a guest, because I think it's bad enough having him on our TV screens at all, bearing in mind his history. But to have him on to talk about that subject matter is just absolutely, completely and utterly unsuitable.
James, I apologise. I should have said you broke this story, so I've said that again, so that's everyone knows that you're the man who's brought this to light, and you're talking to us, and we thank you for that. Mackenzie did a backtrack in 2016 after the public inquiry. So that's 1989 to 2016. All these families fighting to get the truth out there. Now, I was reporting at the time. I was a very young TV journalist at the time, in my early 20s, and I spoke to enough people to know that what happened at Hillsborough wasn't what was being reported by The Sun at all. So, again, how on earth was this allowed to be perpetuated? He said he was hoodwinked. The inquiry said there was, a cover-up in a sense. It's a matter of public record. Police, certain officials engaged in a prolonged and coordinated shift of blame from the authorities to the fans. But surely any journalist worth their salt would have been able to find out that there was a discrepancy between what the fans were saying and had experienced and what they were being told by the authorities.
But exactly, and he wasn't interested in that, because he just swallowed the lies of the police, the ambulance service and the politicians as the cover-up after Hillsborough went into full swing. He swallowed it hook, line and sinker, and he was responsible for publishing that absolutely abhorrent front page that caused so much hurt. I mean, can you imagine, you're dealing with the absolute tragedy of losing a loved one, and then the biggest selling newspaper in the UK reports that it was actually their own fault, and absolutely baseless, sickening lies that you can just, as you just showed before, that front page with the truth headline, just packed full of lie after lie after lie, and that created this false narrative for so many years that the fans were responsible, because then off the back of that you had all this nonsense about it was ticketless fans, it was drunken fans that had forced a gate, when the reality was it was a complete and utter shambles by the authorities. The ground at Hillsborough and Sheffield in the UK wasn't fit for purpose. There was just this passing the buck, and it was, the Sun at the time under Kelvin Mackenzie allowed this narrative to form that the fans were responsible. And of course, I think in this day and age, it's probably hard to understand how something like that could happen. But this was long, long before social media. Newspapers were so influential in terms of convincing people what actually had happened in something. And that was why, the families faced such a long, long fight to get the truth recognised. And it was only really in 2016 when that new inquest, basically cleared the fans of any wrongdoing, that finally the lies that Kelvin Mackenzie had perpetuated were kind of put to bed.
I and my colleagues working on this story for the local independent television company at the time. And I think you'd have been a lot too young to have been involved, probably still at school, I imagine, James. You're much younger than me.
Yeah, I was, yeah.
We spoke to the Devonsides, the Hammonds, people who were leading the campaign, people of great dignity who were seeing these lies printed in the newspaper about their loved ones who'd lost their lives so tragically at a time which was awful. And then you had Margaret Thatcher's press secretary, Sir Bernard Ingham, saying it was a bunch of tanked up scousers. That's what he said, tanked up scousers, which implies, if you don't know what tanked up means, that they were drunk. And of course, that wasn't the case. Some maybe had a beer or two, but it wasn't a drunken mob. It was mismanagement, and it was a whole sort of failure of a system that created the problem. And then you get Kelvin Mackenzie almost reinforcing the whole thing now, being invited on TV. A big error by the BBC, big error.
Huge. I mean, of course, the BBC are coming under some serious criticism at the moment, and that's obviously led to two kind of high-profile resignations in Tim Davie and the head of news, Deborah Turnus. But yeah, this was another really, really poor decision. And I think the thing that disappointed me when I wrote the story yesterday and I contacted the BBC and I explained to them the hurt that this had caused, because I spoke to a guy called Peter Scarf, who was responsible for the Hillsborough Supporters Alliance. And he told me about just, when you see someone like Kelvin Mackenzie given that kind of platform, it still legitimizes him. It still gives him a voice that he shouldn't have when you look at the disgraceful things that he did during his career as a newspaper editor. And let's not forget, those lies in 1989 didn't cost him his job. He remained in that job at the Sun for many, many years afterwards. And when I put all of this to the BBC, they refused to give me an explanation. I said, can you just explain why you thought he was a suitable guest to talk about honesty and integrity and the importance of telling the truth in journalism? And I didn't get a response. The only response I got was to say that it would be factually wrong to say he was a live guest on BBC Breakfast on Monday, because he was actually on the BBC News channel on Sunday night. But for me, that probably makes it even worse, because actually his views were repeated at 7 a.m., 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. on BBC Breakfast on Monday. So someone didn't only think it was a good idea to get him on once, they thought it was a good idea to repeat his views over and over again, which, when you look at his history, is absolutely mind-boggling.
James Pearce, Liverpool Football Club reporter for The Athletic. Thank you for joining us, sir. Well done to you on breaking this story, which is incredibly important. And I think it's right that we give so much time to it. And thank you for joining us to talk it through. I'll end by saying up the Toffees, a cheeky little reference to the team I support. But great to see you. And there's only a friendly rivalry between Reds and Blues on Merseyside. And both sets of supporters, of course, still boycott the Sun newspaper to this day because of Kelvin Mackenzie and his headline there. James, thanks for joining us. James Pearce of The Athletic.